Set. Okay, we will call the meeting to order for the Capitola City Council Successor Agency Joint Budget Study Session for Wednesday, May 16th. May I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harlan.
Here.
Councilmember Bertrand.
Bertrand, here.
Councilmember Peterson. Here. Councilmember Bottorff.
Here.
Mayor Termini.
Here. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting is being cablecast live on Charter Communications, Cable TV Channel 8, and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Meetings can also be viewed from the city's website, cityofcapitola.org. Our technician tonight is Jen Cameron. Thank you very much. And all the crowd of citizens, please make sure your cell phones are off, okay? And please put your name at the podium if you choose to speak to us tonight. Are there any additional materials, Madam City Clerk?
None.
None? Are there any additions and deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll now open the podium to public comment for items not on this evening's agenda. Seeing no one? Are there any staff comments?
Not at this time.
Treasurer,
I am going to take some of your time.
please do.
So our external auditor is in this week, Vavrenek Trine Day and Company, and I had a chance to talk to them for a little bit today. And I know you probably all know this, but it's an interesting process because they are responsible as external auditors for the legality of our finances. So they are going to be doing audits looking for fraud, basically, to put it bluntly. They're going to be focusing first on parking and the recreation department, mainly just because that's where the most cash flow is, and that's the easiest thing to get your dollars mixed up. So it's important, I think, to mention that they're here and that they report out twice a month, because I know the constituents are always concerned about our finances and are they being properly audited and handled. And of course, whether they're being handled wisely is your job. Whether they're being handled legally is the external audit. Efficiently, that's an internal audit, so we're doing on that right now. So again, I think it's important to point that out, that we do have lots of checks and balances on our finances, and this is one of them, and they're here this week.
Very good, thank you. Council members, comments?
None.
Kristen? Jacques?
I did my first ride on the SMART train in Marin to San Rafael up north. San Rafael up north to Santa Rosa. It was very interesting. So those who are following the trail rail thing, it was very illuminating.
Stephanie, anything? Okay, I have nothing as well. We'll go on to the consent calendar. There's only one item, and that's successor agency meeting minutes. Anyone like to pull the minutes? If not, is there a motion?
Motion to approve minutes.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. On to general government. This is the presentation of the 2018-19 fiscal year budget for the city of Capitola. And on with the show.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, before I kick off our budget presentation tonight, I just want to let you know that we had a very interesting call today from to our police department, and they respond to a call of a suspicious vehicle in a vehicle. It's a call that I've never heard of before in my career as a city manager, and I thought sometimes a picture is worth 1,000
Would you repeat that?
words.
A suspicious vehicle inside a vehicle?
Suspicious vehicle in a vehicle. So I figured it was a typo, but sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, and so this was the response in the call for service. So
That's wonderful. That's a spare car. I like that.
Didn't have to tow it.
anyway, to just take us back on track. I do want to kick off the presentation tonight on our budget. Before I get started, I really want to thank the department heads, the finance department, and Jim in particular for all their hard work on the budget. The preparation of this document is not done by an individual; it's done by a team. And Jim put a lot of time and effort into really pulling it all together and quarterbacking the process and helping get us from A to B. So I really want to thank him for that. You'll have plenty of time to hear from him and grill them on questions as we get into tonight a little bit further. Overall, as we look at the economy and we look at our revenues and expenditures, we continue to see growth in our local economy. However, it's at a slower pace than we've experienced in recent years. Generally, this is a status quo budget. We will be touching on some process improvements, some efficiency improvements that we're either proposing or that we recently approved last year at the mid-year. We have no net new positions. There are some reorganizations, which we'll be discussing later in tonight's presentation. There are no new significant revenue sources in this year's budget. As you're going to hear about a bunch tonight, the PERS cost, the UAL, the unfunded liability, remains our most significant driver of costs at this point and the most significant impact on our future budgets. And as you've heard me say many times during these budget processes, the city's heavy reliance on sales tax continues to pose a threat or a risk to the city as we move forward. Overall, looking really big picture, we're estimating that we'll end the year with about $1 million in fund balance. That's excess of revenues over expenditures in fund balance. The budget that's proposed before you tonight fully funds our contingency and our emergency reserve at the policy established levels. Real big picture highlights: the construction of the new library is scheduled to begin right at the beginning of this new fiscal year, pending the receipt of bids that'll come in at the end of the month. It'll be our first full year of Measure F, and we're kicking off funding of those projects, and Steve will be presenting status of the CIP projects later this evening. And then we get our first full year of SB1, which is the new road tax at a state level, gas tax at a state level, and we'll be talking more about how those funds get expended. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Jim for the first really exciting slide of the evening.
So the slide up there right now is kind of a summary of revenues and expenditures. The takeaway here, as you can see, is on the revenue side, a lot of those things are starting to level out and growth is slowing down. On the expenditure side, other than personnel, everything is fairly flat right there. Personnel costs are driven, as Jamie mentioned, by the unfunded UAL and then just basic inflation and people moving within their steps and everything. I think the takeaway on this slide is, as Jamie mentioned, we're estimating ending the year with a positive fund balance of right around $1 million, and that the budget that we're proposing today is balanced, although it's $7,900 of revenues in excess of expenditures, so it's pretty tight. I need to switch.
You're switched.
On this slide here, I'm just demonstrating what some of the assumptions that we made on the revenue side. So property tax, we're estimating to grow at 4%. So we have the 2% from Prop 13 plus housing turnover. And I talked to the county assessor, and that's pretty much the same inflationary factor that they're using there. Sales tax, we're growing it at 1% based on our actual receipts. So we took the last 4 quarters of actual receipts, and in consultation with Community Services, who's our sales tax expert, they're projecting a 1% growth. So from our year-end estimate and our budget change, it's less than 1%, but we are growing 1% on actual. Sales tax, the districts are district sales tax Measure F and Measure D are growing, or Measure O, are growing at 1% as well. TOT, we're estimating to grow at 1.5%. That one, I'll get into each of these a little bit more as we get later on. Parking revenue is around 1%, and then parking citations is also 1% over actual receipts. We had some issues this past year where we had folks out, not out issuing tickets, so we're a little bit behind this year, but catching up fairly quickly. That number is probably a little bit light. I've talked to the chief since I had that original number, and I think it'll be a little bit better. The 22.5 will be lower. Some of the notes on revenue, again, sales tax is beginning to slow, and sales tax represents 50% of all of our general fund revenue, and out of that, our top 25 producers are 63% of that revenue, and top 5% represent 35% of that revenue. So not only are we heavily reliant on sales tax, we're heavily reliant on a small sector of sales tax producers. Just district sales tax, again, remaining relatively flat. Property tax growing with the housing turnover. I think I've already touched on all these. The TOT, That growth is starting to slow. Not so much that there's not as many folks coming. I think we're just starting to see during the peak season, we fill up all of our rooms. So it's more of a inventory issue than it is people visiting Capitola on why that one's starting to slow down a little bit. So for sales tax, to put it graphically, you can see that's fairly flat over the last 3 years. You can see the orange that's in there was Measure D as that ended on December of last year, and then the gray is Measure F kicking in January 1st of this year. Bradley Burns is the big one, and that's the one that's staying really flat right now. Property tax, again, growing at 4%. I think that one's a little bit on the conservative side, which is why I placed the call to the assessor. I kind of wanted to bump that up, but when they told me they were going with 4%, I thought I'd kind of be consistent with what they're doing. And the TOT, just in graphic form, again, pretty flat. So Jamie did mention some overall efficiencies that we did through reorganizations, and I'll let him kind of run through those.
Sure. So one of these is a position that we talked about in mid-year, which was shifting the parking meter responsibilities from the police department to the public works. This change was really due to the kind of increased complexities of our new parking pay stations, where they're really to be operated on by a technician. So we took one of our PEO positions that was a full-time position and turned it into an hourly position, really to help us out during the summer, which is our peak parking demand and our peak demand for parking enforcement services, and then moved those cost savings into public works to increase some mechanic time and then hire more summer help in the summer, again, during the peak public works demand period. And that was a net savings of about $30,000. As you recall, in the mid-year, we also converted one of the police officer positions to a sergeant to help increase oversight within the investigations unit in the police department, and that was a $13,000 cost. We also talked about recently a shared building official model where we would share our building official 50% with the city of Scotts Valley pending a successful recruitment, and then we would end up with a 50% development services tech, which was a net savings. We're also proposing in this year's budget to convert some vacant finance positions that Jim's been able to manage through reorganization and sort of efficiency improvements in finance, which was all told accounted for 3/4 of a full-time staff person. And we plan to convert that, or proposing to convert that, to a half-time development services tech, which would give us a full development services tech to support planning and building. And that, with that switch also comes some of the responsibilities that finance has been taking care of for community development, particularly associated with the housing loans. So the housing loans and the management of that portfolio would shift back to the planning department under this proposal. We're also proposing to fill the vacant accountant 2 position at accountant 1 level, which is a salary savings. And then there's also been a public works reorganization that we've talked about for quite a number of years that involved hiring a project manager to help out Steve on the projects, and then with a pending retirement or anticipated retirement, not filling the maintenance superintendent when that time comes. Say again?
Did I jump 2 screens here?
No, you're good.
Okay. So again, the CalPERS unfunded liability is the biggest thing that we have on the horizon challenging our resources. Just to put it into kind of numbers, this current year that we're in, our UAL cost was $985,000 for the entire city. That's growing to $2.5 million by 2025. So that pretty large increase there. Construction of the new library is going to begin this year, and we just got an update from the county on the library fund and actually closed that gap. There's another $81,000 in that JPA fund. That number's gone up $81,000 since the last time, so our gap now is down to $36,000, which on a $13 million project is
So
pretty small.
There's 2 factors that led to, I think the last time you saw the gap, it was around $360,000. And so one thing that happened was the campaign has been incredibly successful, and they've established a new funding target of raising $600,000 for the library, up from the $350,000 that they'd originally committed to. And then in addition, the library fund, where we'd worked out an arrangement with the county about how those funds were going to be shared, they've been able to bump up that revenue sharing estimate, and so that resulted in another about $80,000. So at this point, our funding gap is essentially, we're essentially funded to our budget estimate, obviously pending the receipt of the actual construction bids later this month or early next month.
And then also, this is the first year of Measure F funds, and Steve will get into a little more detail later, but 100% of the revenue for this year is dedicated towards the wharf, jetty, and flume projects. And then on our JPA that we belong to for insurance, we've seen our liability insurance decrease by around $9,000 and workers' comp by $16,000. So this is actually a repeat, half of that slide that we saw earlier on the expenditure summary. So this is a little easier to read, but of that increase on the personnel side, about half of that is just the PERS UAL. And then the other financing uses, last year we had transfers going out to CIP projects that we don't have this year. So those reduced transfers are really helping us balance this year. And then in addition, we have the gas tax Measure D and RTC money all getting programmed into street maintenance projects. This breaks down our expenditures by category. So as a service-oriented city, you can see that our largest cost is personnel at 64.5%. The other ones kind of all fall in there. Contract services, 20% is pretty large. Internal services is really just moving into funds, IT and equipment and those types of things, and insurance. And by department, expenditures broken out by department, PD, obviously the largest there at 48%, Public Works at 20%, and then Recreation in the city manager's office kind of falling in behind that. And then capital projects. So I will turn it over to Steve.
Evening, Mayor and Council.
6.3 or 6.1? I gotta make it.
One of you has to advance the slide for me. Right?
Yeah.
So first, we'll look at the library fund. Obviously, we have bids coming in on, right now it looks like it's going to be early in June on the project, which will help us tie down, but the revenue sources there are the same that we've seen over time. As was mentioned, the fundraising campaign has been very successful, and the other sources has gone up recently. So our current unfunded construction estimate is only $36,000. That's something we can deal with when we get to the bids. Hopefully, bids will come in $36,000 under our estimate, or we'll all be fine. But we'll see. Once we get the budget, we'll come back and when we award the contract, we'll close up those funding gaps. Looking at the Measure F projects, as you know, we're in the process of moving forward with the flume and jetty construction right now, and doing some schematic design work on the wharf project. So we anticipate a little over $1 million in revenue from Measure F in this next year. All of that is being allocated to these three projects. The amounts of that we're putting into the flume and the jetty to ensure we have enough to complete those projects. We do anticipate them being completed by a year from now, and then the balance is going into the wharf. Any money that may be left over from the flume and jetty will then be available to be back up into the wharf fund. At this point, we're pretty comfortable with the flume and jetty reconstruction costs, that those will be sufficient enough. And on the wharf project, like I said, we're just starting schematic design. I anticipate coming back to the council in the very near future, kind of an update on the wharf project, what we're looking at, and updating the costs that we had. We had some projected costs when we started the engineering contract, when we awarded that, and we're going to take and revisit that, make sure we're headed in the right direction there. Measure D, so we're in our second year of Measure D. That's the local RTC road fund project. We estimate about $300,000 a year. And this year, we are combining it with a RTC grant, which is actually a RSTP grant. I can't remember what the acronym is right now. Regional Surface Transportation Program grant that we got for Bromer Street project for $470,000. So we're going to combine those and do a complete street project, repave new sidewalks, new bike lanes on Bromer Street from 41st to 38th. I think that's one of the most needed streets in the city. We have several projects that we know that are on the list that were funded in prior years. This is a quick review of the ones we anticipate making significant headway on, certainly some we hope to complete in that time. First is the ADA transition plan. We've kind of gone through some staffing transitions, who's running that project since our building official left, but so we've had the new project manager in Public Works take that on, and we anticipate moving that forward pretty quickly here. The Monterey Park Trail keeps running into more and more requirements put on it. Right now we have to do a soil study to look for contaminants, so we're waiting for an agreement with the RTC to move that forward. Essentially it's designed. We're just trying to get the permitting and permissions through that, and hopefully we can get that built this year. Wristband Park, I know this has been on the books for a while. The plans are being revised by Mike Arnone again, just to make sure that everything's going to get built correctly. We hope to move that forward very quickly, probably within the next month. Utility undergrounding on Bay Avenue. So this is tied to the roundabout, but this is something that has to happen first. We have to get the utilities underground, especially in that intersection. We have, working with PG&E, they recently informed us we need to scale it back a little. It's not going to affect the roundabout area, but we're working with them to figure out exactly what the scope of that project is going to entail. Park Avenue Sidewalks, another project that's been on the books for quite a while, and we're actually having a community workshop tomorrow to meet with the neighbors, share with them the designs, the impacts it's going to have on their property, and allow that project to go forward this fall. Park Avenue storm damage, that's where the trees fell a couple of Februarys ago and took out the bike lane. We were working with Caltrans to get federal highway money to rebuild that. The federal highway money ran out, so we kind of paused. We've recently been told by Caltrans we should move ahead with the design, so we awarded a design contract just last week, and we'll move forward with the design and then work with Caltrans to try and finalize the funding for that. We do have enough funding for the design work using allocated funds from the budget last year. And finally, 38th Avenue Sidewalk. This is kind of a new project that's hitting the records. We paved 38th Avenue in 2016. A lot of that work was done with a grant. We had another RSTP grant from the RTC. We've completed that review of the cost, and there's actually $90,000 left in our grant. They've authorized us to build the sidewalk, and we're talking in front of the Goodyear down to where that new 11-lot subdivision is. There's a gap in our sidewalk program there. We're currently working with the property owners there to get rights of entry to make sure we can get the project completed. So we do anticipate that. We have design work already done, moving forward with that project as soon as we can get the rights of entry signed. Looking at the equipment fund, we have a police vehicle that's being purchased partially with general fund money, or money coming out of the equipment fund, and with their SLEF funds. And in the Public Works, we're getting a new concrete breaker, which will allow us to make sidewalk repairs a little more efficiently. And a ditch witch, which is actually very critical to our stormwater pollution prevention program, in that we can actually clean out our storm drain inlets with this ditch witch rather than digging them out by hand. So that's a big advantage to us. I will mention that Jim will have to give me the number, but I think we have additional funding that's going into the equipment replacement fund this year in anticipation of purchasing a new street sweeper next year. Those things last about 5 years, and then they wear out, and we're about at our 5th year next year. So we are kind of building up a bank in the equipment fund for that purchase next year.
Steve, before you go, council, questions of Steve?
I had a couple questions.
Go ahead.
One, you can go back to the sidewalk on 38th Avenue. you show,
Yeah, I mean-
there's $90,000 left over and there's a cost of $238.
So the rest of that funding was general fund money that was put in to the project, the paving project. So there's $96,000 of grant money, and there's another $110,000 of general fund money. We're actually trying to true that up, but that's the funding balance in that paving project right now.
So we're going to take $110,000 out of the general fund to do this, but if we don't take advantage of the $90,000, we lose the $90,000?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have till the end of the year.
Okay, I can
Yeah.
see your.
And we're not, the general fund money is already in that project. It's not a new allocation this year.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that. And with regard to the street sweeper, were we not looking into possibly leasing that out, or would?
They were a contract street
You
sweeping we were
had
talking
mentioned
about?
prior to buying another street sweeper, we were going to be looking at an alternative. Whatever happened with that?
So we have continued to research that, and it's been a bit of a challenge. Larry can provide more detail. I'll give a high-level overview, but essentially we've been trying to get quotes from Green Waste, and Green Waste have been trying to coordinate with Scotts Valley to see whether or not they could do both cities. They've been unsuccessful. Larry's recently been talking to Green Waste, and we're continuing to push on that. That's the high-level summary. If you need more details, we'll have to hear from Larry.
No, I think you intrigued the council when you mentioned that we would maybe be able to sub that out and not have this tremendous replacement cost. So I think we're just,
Keep
we're
hoping.
following you. Keep us posted. I mean, I'm sure it's challenging, but is Green Waste doing it with any cities in the county right now currently?
Valley.
No, they're not doing it in the county. They're not doing it in this county.
Really?
Yeah, the only
Okay.
place they do it is in San Jose right now. But
So-
they are still in tree.
Our
Still listening.
our partnership with Scotts Valley now could grow into bringing them in.
It could grow for sure. And one of the other things we're looking at, Steve and I have been talking about is each one of these street sweepers costs about $250,000, and we end up buying one and then using it for 5 years, and then we buy another one, and the old one goes in as the backup for when
Right.
the main one breaks. And we're even exploring, that means we have $500,000 of rolling stock at any given point in time. And there are smaller street sweepers out there, and maybe looking at a different model where we have a smaller street sweeper that costs $50,000 that we use on half of our streets, and the big one lasts for 10 years because we use it half the time, and it's only used for the bigger streets, and that's some way to reduce the overall sort of long-term liabilities and costs. So street sweeping continues to be an area we're focusing on, and we will continue to push on Green Waste and see if there is an option to contract that out.
As the mayor said, just keep us posted.
Kristen, anything?
Yeah, in terms of your complete streets on Bromer, so we've had a project to line up the lights along 41st. Is there any money that could be available to throw into that on the Bromer Street project?
From the Bromer Street project into the signal coordination project?
Yeah, I mean, because
Right now
that's
there
where
is-
that's the first light in the string, right, up to,
Right, yeah, it goes from there all the way up
yeah,
to.
all the way up to the highway.
Gross, no, it doesn't go to the highway, it just goes to Claire's and 41st.
Okay, excuse me, can't go to the highway, right?
Right. Right now, the 770 covers our estimate for, that public outreach we're going to do on the Bromer Street project and all the way through construction. That is our estimate. So right now, I can't say there's any available funding to augment the signal coordination. I will say on the signal coordination project, the Air Board is in the process of their next round of grants and signal coordination. That's what funded. We had $375,000 from the Air Board grant to implement that. The bids came in almost double that amount. We're meeting with the Air Board tomorrow to talk about if they're willing to add additional funding to that project and get it going.
Thanks.
Stephanie? anything?
I saw in the budget that we have planned to do some new flashing stop signs and one at 41st and Melton. So that should help.
So those are flashing pedestrian signs, not stop signs. And those are actually being paid for by mostly paid for out of an Ambasia grant. So we're proceeding. That's not part of the budget document, I believe, but that was a message I'd put out there. So that'll help a great deal, I think, at those intersections. And so we're putting them at 3 intersections, 2 on 41st, Melton, and Raposa. We're also putting one up on Cliff Drive, where that crossing is right in the middle of the road. If they're successful there, we can look at putting one at Bay and Hill, which is another crosswalk we get concerns raised about.
That'd be great.
And those are very economical. Those are about $1,500 a sign versus the rapid flashing beacons, which are about $15,000 a
Because
sign.
we have gotten emails from people going to the spa that wanted
Right.
to have a stop sign there.
Yes, yeah.
Great, thank you, Steve. Peter, you had something?
Well, maybe it can wait, but we talked about prioritizing the public works activities. I don't know if we're going to talk about that in any great detail here, but,
We have
You know.
slides towards the end on that.
all right.
But Steve, that the projects that were funded in prior fiscal years, those are the ones you're focusing on, hopefully to be completed by the end of the year.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Measure D funds, I saw in the budget, we showed Measure D funds at 300K. I thought we were more at four plus on our Measure D. Did we get sliced and diced again?
Yes.
It looks like a painful subject,
yes,
so I'll press it.
There's been a bit of a disagreement among at a staff level between the various agencies about how to interpret the agreement that we ended up reaching about how the Measure D funds were going to get divvied up. I'm still trying to work at a staff level to try to resolve it because I believe we should be closer to 7.5%, 7.75% of the total local pie, and we're closer to 6%,
Right.
which is results in the difference of about $90,000, $80,000.
That's significant.
It is, and unfortunately, it's not easy convincing the RTC staff how to do this.
So when you get to the end of your rope staff-wise, you can bring the council in and we can,
I have
See
been
how we can do it.
coordinating with our RTC rep and our other RTC board member,
One step before the council.
and
please, feel free.
yes, we're working together.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Potential CDBG grants, I think, this Katie time?
So I can cover this one quickly.
Okay.
So just reminding the council, we submitted a $2.7 million CDBG grant this year. It was going to fund the Clare Street Complete Street project, which is very long promised and long awaited project. We have not yet heard on the grant. It also included some housing stuff that we were going to fund out of the CDBG grant, similar to the previous CDBG grant we got, which was for some home rehab projects and home buyer assistance programs. We anticipate hearing in the next 2 months, maybe less. So if it's awarded, it will require council action to execute the contract with CDBG.
And if I'm not mistaken, we have already paid for all the engineering on Claire's, have we not? Because Claire's is a special street for me, because the first night I was on the city council, when ice covered much of the earth, we voted on that.
So unfortunately, we have not. I think that first night we approved a concept plan.
Yes, we
and that's
did.
as far as we've made it so far on that project. Time we try and move forward, the funding disappears on us. We do have a concept plan. Getting through engineering will be pretty quickly, but we have not completed that at this point.
So we get the grant, and will we be able to start construction within the time frame of the grant?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a timeline spelled out in the grant application. And
Good, because Ron Skelton is considerably older than me, and I made him a
Might make
promise 18 years ago I'd like to keep it. Okay, thank you. Jacques?
Yeah. So a question came up last night. Do we have an idea how much of Claire's is going to be paved?
One into the other.
Yeah, well,
from Wharf Road to 41st.
it will be. Okay, there was a concept of doing half at one time, I believe.
So that's what's in the project. Certainly, if we have to defer to 42nd from Wharf Road to the sanitation project, we'll do
Right.
that, but then we'd be able to come back and pave that as soon as that project is
Okay, so
over.
it's funded for the total
At
thing.
the end of the day, it'll all be,
It'll all be done.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Back to you, Mr. Finance Director or City Manager? Who's going to take the next one?
City manager. So one of the things that we do during the budget process is we also like to look ahead, because budgets aren't prepared in a vacuum and there are future fiscal years. And for those of you who are paying attention, I'm sure you noticed that next year's proposed budget is significantly out of balance. As is proposed, it's $500,000 out of balance. It will not be proposed that way next year when we get there. We will obviously identify opportunities and how we will, tools to balance the budget. So one of the things that we use to develop our multi-year budget is a series of assumptions about what our taxes and what our revenue sources are going to grow at. And one of the key points here, you can see my arrow, is 1% sales tax growth over time. And that has a really dramatic impact on city long-term finances because that represents such a large chunk of our revenue stream. And I don't know that 1% a year is right. Based on the most recent data we got, which was a negative year-over-year growth. It's the number we're using right now. I'm hoping that that was a one-time blip and we do continue to see growth in the future, which has a pretty significant impact, particularly when you get to these out years. But when you take a look at that, the net effect is, as you can see in coming years, is growing budget deficits. So in graphic format, this is what it looks like for those of you who don't like the number tables. This is the table format. And so that will lead us into, I think, a conversation that we'll have a little bit later about sort of our work plan priorities and some of the things that for the city to be focused on in this next coming fiscal year. So another thing to discuss a little bit further to this evening is the fund balance, which is, as Jim mentioned earlier, projected at about $1 million for this fiscal year. There's potential uses for it. At this point, I think my number one recommendation would be to keep it in general fund balance because we're going to have challenges, I know, coming fiscal years. An option would be to put a portion of it into the PERS trust fund. This would allow us to earn a higher rate of return on the funds and could be used in any individual year to offset some of our PERS obligation in that year. So in a sense, it's put into the trust fund, but it could be used in any given year that we see fit. There are other opportunities, obviously, that we could use fund balance for. We could put more money into the library at this stage, which I don't think is warranted given the limited funding gap that we have. The facilities reserve can always use more funding. We have an aging stock of buildings in the city, and there's no shortage of things that we could do to them to help improve them, or other CIP projects. But I do want to reiterate the recommendation would really be kind of focus on one or two on that list to help deal with future budget issues.
Could we pause right there?
Okay.
I'd like to get council weigh in on this. This is a really important slide. And Steve, one question for you, basically yes or no, and that is, given the significant CIP work list that you have, putting more money into CIP this year is not going to make any of those projects go any faster.
The one project that is unfunded at this time, which you'll see in a couple more slides, is the Park Avenue storm damage repair, because we're hoping to get federal highway money from that. But if that federal highway money doesn't come through, that would be a good investment.
You have a full dance card for
We
this
have a full
year.
dance card otherwise,
Okay.
but I just
Good.
wanted to mention that project because that could use some money.
Ed,
Yeah, I think, so Steve, I was going to ask about the Park Avenue project, and Steve just hit on that. That was a question, so I think I'm good for now.
good. Anyone else? We talked about this at the FAC last night, and I think there was a lot of, there seemed to be a consensus regarding the first two, which is leaving it in the general fund and PERS trust fund, maybe splitting it 50-50, but we do make money. We have some gain putting it in PERS, and we're certainly going to need it, so it's not like it's locked away, and holding on to $500,000 makes good sense. Peter, do you want to chime in on that with the FAC
So yeah,
comments?
so I'll just reiterate what you just said, and that is, money for capital improvements is, like you said, Steve's got a full dance card. He's been short-staffed up until recently, and even if he had a lot of money, he may not be able even to spend it. So we all agreed. I don't think there was anybody who dissented that we wanted to just basically have a rainy day fund, because the rainy day, we know it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And the PERS trust fund is certainly part of that rainy day fund, because we know that's happening. Jacques.
Yeah, so another thing we talked about, I believe, was the J Street Park, the parking lot area. Yeah, so I'd like to know where that's at, because that's a liability issue.
Yeah, sorry, that was in the facilities fund, so I didn't make it on the CIP list. We are prepared to go out to bid on that. We're kind of looking at our options, best to bid it at this point, but we have one quote, came in quite favorable, so we'll be moving forward with that and doing the basketball court.
Great. And
Great, thank you.
on that note, we had our breakfast club this morning with 2 members of the school board, and they were very amenable to the idea of you reaching out to Scott and working out the incremental increases in the lease based on the amount of money we spend on improving Jade Street.
I will do that. I am not optimistic that we're going to have a lot of available funds in coming years at this stage, but we can have that conversation.
Well, everything we do, including the paving, should
Right.
notch us up a little bit. When the roof goes on, a little bit more, and keep going. Okay. Back to you, staff.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly touch on the budget principles that we've identified in prior years, and then what we'll be doing is focusing in on some work plan, some suggestions for work plan priorities, but then we're looking for council feedback on them either tonight or at a future budget meeting. So one of the kind of core principles that the city has always identified is maintaining a balanced budget. Under our sort of recommended goals for the fiscal year are really kind of the sort of the nuts and bolts of city operations of what we do to make sure that we have a balanced budget. Supporting economic development has been a longstanding city goal. Obviously, a primary driver of that is continuing to work with the mall to facilitate their redevelopment efforts to the extent that it's something that the city controls. It's not so much, but to the extent that we're maintaining open lines of communication and trying to help them move through the issues that they encounter, we can continue to do that. Maintaining a reasonable level of fees, and that's always embodied with our fee ordinance and then our fee schedule update, which we are scheduled to update, I believe, coming up in June. We talk about maintaining a transparent and efficient and accessible government as a long-held city tenant. We've identified specific goals regarding maintaining information on the website and continuing to implement best practices and continuing to outreach to the community. Recognize the high priority that our community places in public safety and our police department. One of the goals that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail tonight is the new neighborhood watch program that the police department plans to roll out in the communities, filling some vacancies within the police department, completing CIT training for all of our officers, and then working with other agencies. This is kind of an inside baseball issue, but the records management system countywide is going to need updating soon, and we take care of that at the 911 JPA level. But that's going to be an important thing to do. And then continuing to review the funding and prioritizing the funding for the capital improvement program and our community service organizations. That's both funding for the CIP and then funding for the community grants through our 2-year grant cycle. So what I've done here is, and was presented to the FAC last night in a slightly different format, is kind of the top 5 program issues that staff has identified to focus on for this next fiscal year. And I'd love to hear council feedback about them. The FAC recommended this as a priority, although I think the neighborhood watch wasn't included in what was presented to them. But frankly, I think since each different departments are addressing different ones of these, they can all be, in my mind, they're all priorities. And if there's another high priority workload item, work plan item, I think it would be great to hear from council either tonight or at a future budget hearing. But so the first one is developing options for council consideration to address rising PERS costs. And that can include identifying opportunities that we may want to pursue for new revenue, identifying opportunities for things that we are doing today that maybe we don't do in the future, or identifying other opportunities. So that we think is a very important thing and is something we would need to move on relatively quickly in this fiscal year. The cannabis regulatory framework has been presented to the council. It's moving through the planning commission, coming up at a coming meeting, and then it'll be coming back to the city council for consideration. And then if we move forward in the strategy we've outlined, ultimately put before voters for approval in November. The neighborhood watch program was something the chief has prioritized and something he'd like to see happen. It was something I think was used more heavily in the city in generations prior, but it's something that they're going to take a look at and see about re-implementing it and see if there's a community interest in getting that going again. Obviously, the zoning code update has been a major work plan item. At this point, it's now balls sort of with the Coastal Commission, so there's going to be a lot of coordination with the Coastal Commission about how we're going to certify our zoning code, how they're going to certify our zoning code. And as always, the mall is such a focus for the city and the long-term fiscal health of the city. continuing to work with them as they, go through their outreach process now, and hopefully as they come in with some sort of project for city consideration. Secondarily, then, these are a bunch of projects that we've already talked about tonight, but we put them down in one place, sort of kind of the summary of where we anticipate to be on our capital improvement projects this year. And so it's number one is getting going on the construction on the Capitola Library. 2 is building the flume and jetty, the redos on those, and then completing the schematic designs for the wharf. The Monterey Park and pedestrian pathway, Steve is talking about it, that's basically the eastern access point out of the Pacific Cove parking lot. We hope that project can be complete, but if the soil testing comes back negative, it's very probable that there can be further issues with that project. We were not anticipating remediation would be necessary with this project. The RTC and sort of the county's position on that has changed over time, and so that's a new impediment in that project's path, pardon the pun. Completing Wristband Park, as Steve mentioned, we anticipate bringing that to council for a bid approval shortly here. The street maintenance projects, that includes Bromer, the Park Avenue storm repairs, which, as Steve mentioned, is currently unfunded, but we're in engineering now, and then the slurry seal project, which council approved last meeting. And then we also have 2 sidewalk projects, the long-promised Park Avenue Sidewalks, and then the new 38th Avenue Sidewalk project. So that's a summary of the kind of the big capital projects and where we anticipate ending the year. So with that really concludes what we have for council, our presentation this evening. And what we're looking for, I think, is if there's questions, budget questions that we can either answer here tonight, or research items which you'd like staff to go back and research before our next budget hearing, or any other direction regarding the work plan or CIP or budget items has been presented this evening. We'd love to hear that direction tonight. And otherwise, our next step will be a May 30th meeting to review the FAC recommendations and take another look and dive into the budget.
Before I bring it back to the council, is there anyone in the audience, this is a public meeting, who would like to address the council on the items that have been listed tonight? Please step right up, state your name, write it down on the clipboard, and talk to us. Welcome.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, how are you doing? Oh, there's no pen. But my name is Jack Tigby.
That was it?
One there. Send that down.
I just want to briefly address two issues. The Wristband Park, I think that looking at the budget, it might be wise to convert Wristband Park into a private residence. Seems like we have quite a revenue gap. Wristband Park is a revenue expenditure. We have lots of parks. We have lots of places in the community where you can go and enjoy the environment. But I think that there could be a significant revenue for converting Wristband Park into a private residence. So, and second, I just want to talk about the CalPERS. I think that pension funds across the United States have seen a decline. And I think that there might be some necessary decline in the benefits to city employees. I know that's a hard thing to have happen. Finance meetings aren't romantic. And so we might have to see some decrease in pension benefits so that we can remain solvent. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? And then I'll bring it back to the council. Ed, you want to start us?
Just a couple questions.
Sure.
Steve or Jamie, just want to know, just for the council's sake, the status of how much funding is available for the Wristband Park project and for the Park Avenue Sidewalk projects.
Both the sides, the dollar amount there you saw. One more.
Here it is.
Right there.
That's part of the
Park Avenue
grant, isn't it?
Sidewalk has about 146,000, and the Wristband Park has about 288,000 currently available.
That's how much is in there. And do we
Right.
know what are there bids yet on what the cost of the project is,
No.
what the shortfall is, or what?
That's what we're trying to come up with. Park Avenue Sidewalk, that's probably about, I'm going to say 3/4 of the necessary funding, so we're real close there. We don't have a
Okay,
final design.
I'm just trying to get a
Right.
feel for where we're
Right.
at. Okay.
Wristband Park is really still kind of an unknown at this point, so I'd be hesitant to say, but it'd probably need at least another $100,000 there.
Okay. All right. I just wanted a ballpark. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Steve, that 288 is part of a Parks grant, isn't it? Is that
No.
some grant funds in there?
So we had a grant fund that went to the
ADA?
ADA project.
Okay.
And then we took some of the
That's what I'm
other
confusing it
funding,
with.
right.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, continue, Ed.
That was it. I
was
just
it?
had those two questions. Yes,
Kristen?
thank you.
I don't really have any questions, but I'm glad to see that the proposed budget work plan has CalPERS as number one, because I'm really worried about it, and it's something that I'm looking forward to continuing to look into. That's all.
So I like the list of priorities of projects that we're going to be delivering to the Capitola citizens here. I think that's a great list of things that, once they're completed, will greatly benefit the city. Also to Police Chief, commend you for bringing back Neighborhood Watch. We did have a recent hearing, won't talk about the subject, but people did come up and talk about issues they had in their community and on the street that they're aware of, and so these are the kinds of things that will help address that. One thing I'm glad to see here is support economic development. The mall, to me, seems more of a long-term thing. We hope it could get done tomorrow, that everything would change, but I don't think that's going to happen. So in terms of continue to research economic development options and tools, when you think about the fact that our sales tax pretty much is dependent on so few options in this city, I think one of the focuses of economic development, if we do a committee, which I think we should, is to broaden out the options that we have to draw to draw a sales tax from. We need to sort of broaden what's available and hopefully get a broader base for our sales tax. That's what I'd like to see on that effort there.
Stephanie, do you have anything?
A couple of questions and a comment. On page 60, we have the community-based health and human service providers. And we do have a figure in there that we have talked about continuing in future years. But what I would like us to do is consider using the same application that the city of Watsonville is using, and Scotts Valley is going to consider that also. That would make the providers' lives much easier than filling out 3 applications for Scotts Valley, Watsonville, and Capitola. Watsonville's is online. Their staff person said they would be happy to work with us, and we can tweak a few things if there's a few questions there that we don't like. But I think we really need to do it, and we should get it out as soon as we can, because they can't go into their next budget year without knowing what their allocation is going to be. They feel really nervous about that. And I know they talked to Larry, but I would strongly urge us to consider and vote on their funding sooner rather than later, because they need to know their funding, and they have funding gaps also, and they need the local monies. That really is important to them.
Larry, can you speak on the application system?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor, council members. So we've looked at and we've talked with Watsonville. The unfortunate thing is Watsonville is in the second year of a 2-year grant. So they went out last year. So what we need to do is figure out a way, if that's the direction the council wants us to go, kind of getting everybody back on the same year annual or every 2-year grant cycle. So they're right in the middle. They are not. They took applications last year. We are going to be doing it this year. That being said, we're going to make it the application we're working with is going to be very similar to Watsonville's. It's not going to be asking a whole lot more information. If any, they actually have a different set of funding that they ask questions about, so we're going to be making it a much shorter application. I have talked to some of the community grant folks, and they understand that we're off a year, and that, but we're going to try to make it as simple as possible for them at this point.
Can you work with Scotts Valley so they can just fill out 1 application rather than 2?
Yes, we'll be working with Scotts Valley as well, but they should be the information should be pretty much transferable. As far as the main information, each jurisdiction will definitely want specifics for their cities about number of people they serve and that sort of thing, but for the most part they're going to be very similar as far as the data that's required.
Well, it would be nice if they were similar.
Yes.
So the providers could just fill out 1 and change the name and change the numbers.
Yes.
And then send it in, because it's a lot of work
Absolutely.
for their staff to do this, and some of them have very small staffs, and it just takes a lot of time.
Certainly. Anything else, Stephanie?
Yeah, I have some questions. On page, not a page number. Well, should we have page numbers on these?
Mine has page numbers.
Some don't.
City manager administration, right after the mission statement,
Oh, wait a minute.
right at the beginning
What
of the.
tab are you, what tab are you on? The
White tab,
Okay,
page 3, page 4.
got it.
It doesn't have anything for information systems specialist there for the next year. Are you changing that?
So the information system specialist, we've gone back and forth, and since we lost our last information system specialist, we have ended up.
Not really.
That was a twofer. That was a twofer.
We've ended up contracting out that position. So you see how it disappeared in 16-7 actual, then we had it in the 17-18 adopted. We've ended up continuing to contract it out. So it's now a contract.
In the contract section. Okay. And finance director, tell me about on the finance page, the next page, just before the police summary. And it has the authorized positions. Tell me what you're thinking there for the positions.
So currently we have my position, the senior accountant. We have an accountant 2 that's vacant. The account tech is a 3/4 time, and she's been backfilling the accountant 2.
There doesn't have anybody there for accountant tech, though, for the proposed year.
Right, so what I'm proposing is to convert to fill the accountant 2 vacancy at the accountant 1 level.
Uh-huh.
And then the account technician position will be vacant, and we'll give up half of that FTE to development services, for the development services technician in building.
Okay. And the receivable clerk works Helen works 3/4 time?
Correct.
Okay. I thought she was picking up more hours.
She was,
a while?
She was when Mark Welsh and Lonnie first left. Oh, sorry. She was picking up more hours when the previous finance director left and Lonnie retired.
Yeah.
And then once I got in, we got through last year's audit. She asked to go back to the 3/4 time.
Okay.
And we've been able to make that work.
Great. That's good. Okay. Going on 2 more pages to animal services. It's going up from 38,000 to 52,000. Is that just the new charge? They just suddenly went up a whole lot? Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. To answer your question, that is the contractual increase on a year-by-year basis with a 4-year smoothing effect. I believe that we're in the current fiscal year 17-18, that's year 1. Upcoming budget is year number 2 of the 4-year smoothing effect with increases in each year. The amount, to my understanding, is 42,000. I think this 51,000 is in year 3 of the 4-year contract. So this is a typo. The actual amount is 42,000, roughly $42,000.
Okay. And how do you feel about our services? We getting good service for
I
our
think
money?
it's excellent service. I think the relationship is much better between our police department, animal services, and I think our response is better as well.
And are you the board member, or who's the board member that goes to the animal services agency?
Sergeant
meetings?
Marquise Booth and myself share those duties.
Great. Well, let us know if there's anything interesting going on that we should know about.
I will.
Thank you, with their services. Okay.
I was just going to provide a little bit more background on this one. So recall for a very long time, we did our animal services in-house, and then we would contract with somebody else to store and house the animals. At some point, we stopped using SPCA due to some concerns about how that was working out, and we contracted with ASA for a number of years under very favorable terms. And ASA, recall, basically issued us a notice that said, we're not going to continue to contract for services with you, Capitola, and you have to join the JPA or not. At that point, we said, well, we'd be interested in joining, but the formulas that you have for allocating costs don't work for us. So they did revise their formulas, and then they gave us sort of a proposal to sort of smooth us in from our old contract rate into a full-fledged member rate. But remember, it was a significant step increase. And so this is the second typo of the evening that we've got. But this number is off by about $9,000. And so that'll be corrected as we move forward. We'll have a list of all the sort of different corrections because there's a number of little items. But this is that ramp up period in the animal services JPA costs.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, the next page. Excuse me. Public Works summary on the personnel list also there. One Public Works Director, one Engineer Project Manager, one Maintenance Superintendent, Field Supervisor, Maintenance Worker, 1 and 2, Maintenance Worker 3, Mechanic, and Environmental Projects Manager. The Environmental Projects Manager is Danny?
Yes.
Okay. And we have 1.5 mechanics. Who's one's already a staff person, and who's?
So that is the change we made at mid-year to take meter maintenance into the Public Works Department. We took one of our mechanically adept maintenance workers and made him a half-time mechanic to work on the parking meters. He's also helping out.
Okay, so that's the
other
other half
mechanic,
for the
yes.
8.5 position that's just up above that. Maintenance
Yes.
worker 1 and
Yeah,
2. It says
right.
8.5 positions. Okay, great, thank you.
In addition, I will note that there's a bit of succession planning incorporated into that maintenance worker the mechanic transition. To make sure that when our mechanic, when he does retire, that there's somebody who's prepared to step into that role. In addition, I will note that we have this maintenance superintendent scheduled for a full FTE this year. There's potentially retirement that'll occur earlier in the year, in which case that would revert to a sort of half FTE for half the year.
And where is Ed's position in here?
Ed is he's actually been working under a contract. He's going to be moving into an hourly annuitant position, I believe,
Contract
July
services.
1st. July 1st. So he'll move out of contract service and just into an hourly annuitant. It's probably a better way to capture his costs.
Okay. Okay. The next page, under fleet, it says 1.5 for mechanic, senior mechanic. So that's that change. That's where that shows up there. Yeah, okay. Okay, into the blue section, internal service funds. Under library, no, not under library, under,
You guys have a different book.
She has different colored tabs.
Yeah, but everything, and no numbers.
under, for planning, the other side of the library page, home program reuse.
Special revenue funds.
Yeah. What are we planning for that this year?
So under the home investment partnership, the home programming loans, this is for affordable housing activities. And this, I believe the money is used towards the management of the Bay Avenue senior apartments. And I'll just first start that saying, in stepping into my new position, I'm getting used to seeing where all these funds go and where they're applied. So I'd be happy to come back to you with a thorough explanation of this. But there's the Bay Avenue senior apartments. I believe there were loans that were established in there. This is part of the repayment of loans that comes in through that, the process of circulation.
So the expenditures that are in there are for monitoring on those home loans, which are associated with the Bay Avenue Senior Project by and large. But there is $200,000 of fund balance. It's a restricted source, so it needs to be used for affordable housing. But there is fund balance in the home program reuse fund.
Right. How much of it do we usually spend? We haven't spent very much of it in the last.
So the balance has grown over time. You can see, actually, it's a pretty nice summary. Over time, you've seen that there's revenue that's been coming back into the fund. So the fund has been growing. We haven't identified a specific use for it. It's relatively restricted funds, and I don't think sitting here, either myself or the community development director can identify exactly what the restrictions are on home program funds, but we could come back to the council with more information about that.
Okay. And the next page, the Housing Trust Fund. Where are, maybe this is for finance, where are we getting this money that says other financing uses, $25,000? And you can come back with that answer too.
So that's actually an expenditure. So so the housing trust, revenue from the, comes into the housing trust, it's the inclusionary fees that's paid for on new development projects. And the other financing uses, what that's been is, recall when we closed the Pacific Cove Mobile Home Park, we relocated a number of low-income residents. And at the time, when we identified that debt, we said, okay, I can't remember what the percentage was, 30% of the debt was going to be paid for using the housing trust. So though the other financing uses, that's going for the debt service to pay for our costs associated with closing the Pacific Cove Mobile Home Park, specifically relocating lower income residents.
So how long is that debt going to go on?
2029?
We can check.
actually-
It's,
yeah,
it's
That's,
in there.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Just,
Frankly, it's been a bit of a sinking fund. We've known that that's been the case, so we have been sort of scaling back the expenditures out of it. This year, we bumped it up slightly because the revenues did increase, but as a result, the housing trust hasn't had much balance because we've been using it for that debt service.
Yeah, the
And
final payment's March 1st of 2029.
And you can also see under contract services, that was Carolyn Flynn's previous position, that's now gone away, that, the 14,963.
where is her salary included?
so Carolyn has retired.
Did we have a retirement party?
We did not have a retirement party. She was a contract employee. She still has been at City Hall a few times, but yeah, she's told us that she's at this point ready to step away and focus full time on her teaching and her writing.
Great.
Yeah.
We should all send her a card. We should get a council card, and I'll get one and bring it to the next meeting.
brought
Yeah.
in-
I
made a lot of money
know
for
that-
us.
I hadn't seen her for a long time, but I didn't know she'd retired. Are we having a party for Elise, by the way?
We will.
Well, we should. We
Yes.
should. She's been here almost 30 years. Yeah, half her life she's been here. Okay, my other question is, where's the money? Oh, I think I have one more. PERS contingency reserve, facilities reserve. We're bumping that up to 800,000. The fund balance is going up to 800,000. I guess, well, we're transferring money into that.
Correct. We're, in the 17-18 budget, council authorized us transferring or depositing 500,000 into that PERS trust.
Right, right, okay. Where do we have money for the remodel of City Hall?
Facilities.
Facilities fund, but we don't have a whole lot going into the facilities fund this
We
year.
set aside $75,000 last year.
Yeah, that's there.
Still there.
I don't know that we'll spend all of that this year, and it'll stay in the
How's the
facilities
planning
fund.
coming?
I think the term is, it's a little bit of a project creep, scope creep. So we're trying to finalize what we're going to be doing, but we have kind of the basics. We're just kind of trying to finalize I'm sorry. I apologize.
Another question for Larry.
Apologize. So we are kind of, we have the basic concepts. We're just kind of finalizing what each office that we're going to be able to touch is going to look like. There's just been a couple changes of late that we're wanting to address based on employee requests. So it is still moving forward, just a little slower than I think we want.
The idea about when you're going to start it?
Soon. We have to get with, there's been a change that I think we just have to look at to see what it's going to take. It's a little more in depth than we originally thought it was going to be. So again, I have most of the quotes for all of the, I guess, the carpeting and the flooring and the wall, but we don't want to get going on that until we are sure we're ready with more of the construction type issues. So we have a plan that I think the Public Works Director and myself are going to kind of figure out if we can do that in-house or we have to find someone to contract that work for. So,
Okay, thank you. I'd like to be done before I leave,
yes.
before
Very
Mike
good.
and I leave.
Jacques, you want to go again?
Yeah, I just have a question for Larry. So, yeah, I'm interested also in the common application process.
Correct.
When the county ran it, this is one thing I said, they ran it through the county and everything was online.
That's correct.
That's correct. So is there any way we could get back to that? Because there was a lot of efficiency in that. And I know you can't answer that right now, but if we could dovetail with Watsonville, which I think is, an option that we could look at. I don't know if it's going to fit our needs, but somehow.
We will definitely
Do
look
that.
at electronic ways to do it.
Okay.
The reality was that application was much more complex than we needed, Watsonville needed, or Scotts Valley needed.
Yes.
So there was a lot of information that was required that honestly we didn't use. It was mainly for the county and the Human Services Department, so they had a lot more requirements. So we've basically taken, just so you know, we've kind of taken what Watsonville's done and kind of pared it down even further. So, and I've talked to some of the providers and they're fine with it. I think, maybe a little different moving forward if we do get the application out maybe a little sooner, that would make them feel better. The reality is we never allocated funds until December of the fiscal year, or it never paid. So it's not going to change the timing of the funding. It's just that I think they were, a couple of them were definitely more concerned that it made planning maybe a little more difficult.
Right, their budget depends on what they know the revenue is going to be.
Right.
In many ways, the nonprofits are our partners here in the community.
Correct.
And so we get a lot of benefit out of supporting them, and Capitola has been very generous in that way. And I just wanted to say that I support generally what Stephanie's brought up, and one of the benefits of the common application was it was one application fits
Yes.
all. And you're absolutely right that what we need is not as much as what the whole thing, Santa Cruz County required, and Watsonville is more in line with us too. So, thank you.
Ed, next.
I'm not sure how this application process worked, but would it behoove us, or would it make any sense if we're out of sync with Watsonville to do a one-year contract to get in sync with them and then go back to our two-year contract? Is that?
Our 2 years been working so well, and I think we're just looking for not so much being in sync, but using the same application. I think that's the real benefit to the groups.
So there's no advantage of doing them all simultaneously? Okay.
Stephanie?
I'd like the council to consider putting $1,000 in the budget to save for about 4 years when the bushes grow up again on the yellow path, the yellow brick road, so that a council member doesn't have to pay to have those trimmed. The private property owners were absolutely willing to have those bushes trimmed so you could see the light, so you could see the beach, so you could see the boats, so you could see Capitola, but that should be paid for by the city.
We'll talk about it with Public Works. I'd like to talk about head count, and thank you very much. We have the same or reduced head count. I always applaud that because that's one of those benchmarks that people always look at, and yet I have concerns about the police department. And Chief, maybe you'd like to speak about having reducing by one officer. It seems like we're always short one patrol person, and I know we just brought on a 5th sergeant. I know the rationale for that, and supported 100%. Can you speak to our workforce? Are we an officer short, and could we use that 16th officer out there?
I'm very happy with the mid-year proposal when we talked about this, and transitioning from 4 sergeants to 16 patrol officers to currently 5 sergeants, a 5th sergeant, and 15 patrol officers. If we get to the point of full staffing, which would be 15 total patrol officers, we'd be in a better position than we are currently, but that's the right formula for efficiency, for operations, and the necessary supervisory oversight, in my opinion.
So we could stand to have another police officer? Or is 15 the
15
right?
is the budgeted number, and that's the appropriate number.
It's the appropriate number. That's all I wanted to hear. Thank you.
He's happy.
I think you have direction. I think if you come back to us, compiling something to make us feel better about PERS in the coming year, and include in that the potentials such as we know that getting the new hotel built either in the village or on 41st Avenue. I know there's one in the offing up there as well. Also, what the effect of the cannabis tax would do to our budget to help bridge the gap in the coming years, and any other ideas you might have. We might also, before the next meeting, reach out to the mall and see if they have a better idea of our timeline, because I don't know that it's necessarily as long a term project as we think. I think they're going to go at it incrementally, so we may start seeing some improvements in the mall in the next couple of years, and especially with new tenants and with incremental refurbishing. Can you also update us on the status of the Sears property and whether the Planning Commission and Community Development is going ahead to approve the demising of that building and we're going to see new tenants in there, or is that on hold?
So let me touch on, first on the PERS issue. I think we can come back at the next council meeting with, some budget scenarios of like what the cannabis tax could do, what the hotels could do, what some other tax options might look like. The mall project, I was on the phone actually with the mall ownership this week, and this was the conversation, this exact topic. And I'll be honest with you, it really comes down to, for the mall owners at this point, it's site control. How much of the site are they going to control, and are they designing? Are they designing just for the piece that they own today, or is it the piece that they might own tomorrow? And so that's the push-pull that they're facing. So in some senses, I Councilwoman Harlan's point about it being a longer term, or maybe it was Councilmember Bertrand's point that it was maybe a longer term project. It's probably correct, but then again, the dominoes could fall next week and suddenly we could be in a different sort of mode with them. So it's really hard at this stage to predict where exactly the mall is going to land. I think an update on Seritage is warranted, but let's wait until the next meeting because it's a little bit fluid situation right now, and our city attorney is doing some work for us. And
very good.
We can come back to you with that.
Excellent. Stephanie?
Scotts Valley is thinking about putting a sales tax measure on the ballot and also increasing their TOT to 12% perhaps. So this would be a good time for us to put that measure back on, the increase in TOT.
Now I think we'll hear from Ed.
I've been working on that. I've been talking to people because I have been talking with Scotts Valley also, and there are a couple other agencies, Watsonville possibly also. But right now I'm just doing some background so we don't have any major opposition against it. I think that there's a possible way that we might be able to do that and make everybody happy. So keep you posted on that.
I'd like to not spend my last year on council on a postcard. Thank you very much. So if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting to our next special meeting, which is
May 30th?
May 30th, 2 weeks from tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yay.